Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear students, today we will discuss the disease AIDS, the acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. In the coming slides, we will discuss the problem statement, epidemiological determinants of the disease, clinical features and diagnosis, preventive and control measures of the disease. AIDS, the acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, sometimes also known as the Slim's disease, is a fatal illness caused by a retrovirus known as human immunodeficiency virus. It breaks down the human body's immune system, leaving the victim vulnerable to a host of life-threatening opportunistic infections, neurological disorders, or unusual malignancies. Among the special features of HIV infection are that once infected, it is probable that a person will be infected for life. Term AIDS refers to only the last stage of human immunodeficiency virus infection. AIDS can be called our modern-day epidemic, affecting both the industrialized and the developing countries. In early 1980s, AIDS was recognized as an emerging disease. However, after that, AIDS has rapidly established itself throughout the world. AIDS has evolved from a mysterious illness to a global pandemic which has infected tens of millions of people. The number of people who are living with HIV infection continues to grow, as does the number of deaths due to AIDS. Of particular concern are the trends which are affecting Eastern Europe and Central Asian countries, where the number of people acquiring the HIV infection and dying from HIV-related causes continue to increase. HIV is a modern-day epidemic. WHO and UNAIDS define the different types of HIV epidemics. There are three different types of HIV epidemics: low-level HIV epidemics, concentrated HIV epidemics, and generalized HIV epidemics. First of all, we will discuss the low-level HIV epidemics. Although HIV may have existed for many years, it has never spread to substantial levels in any subpopulation. Recorded infection is largely confined to individuals with high-risk behavior, for example, sex workers, drug injectors, men having sex with men. In terms of numerical proxy, HIV prevalence has not consistently exceeded 5% in any defined subpopulation. This is known as low-level HIV epidemics. Now we will discuss the concentrated HIV epidemics. HIV has spread rapidly in a defined subpopulation, but it is not well established in the general population. This epidemic state suggests active networks of infection, active networks of risk within the subpopulation. The future course of the epidemic is determined by the frequency and nature of links between the highly infected subpopulation and the general population. In terms of numerical proxy, HIV prevalence is consistently over 5% in at least one defined subpopulation, but it is below 1% in pregnant women in urban areas. Generalized HIV epidemics. HIV is firmly established in the general population, although subpopulations at high risk may contribute disproportionately to the spread of HIV. Sexual networking in the general population is sufficient, to sustain an epidemic independent of subpopulation groups at higher risk of infection. In terms of numerical proxy, HIV prevalence consistently over 1% in pregnant women. Now we will discuss the epidemiological determinants. First of all, we will discuss the agent factors. Initially, the virus was called as lymphadenopathy associated virus. Researchers in USA called it human T-cell lymphotrophic virus. In May 1986, the International Committee on Taxonomy gave it a new name, that is human immunodeficiency virus, HIV. The virus has the unique ability to destroy the human T4 helper cells, a subset of human T lymphocytes. It can pass through the blood-brain barrier and can then destroy the brain cells. This may account for the certain of the neurological and psychomotor abnormalities which are observed in HIV and AIDS infection. HIV mutates rapidly. New strains, they are continually developing. There are two types of HIV, HIV-1 and HIV-2. The virus is easily killed by heat. It is readily inactivated by ether, acetone, ethanol 20%, beta-propiolactone, but is relatively resistant to ionizing radiation and ultraviolet light. Reservoir of infection. These are cases and carriers. Once a person is infected, the virus remains in the human body lifelong. The risk of developing AIDS increases with time since HIV infection can take years to manifest itself. The symptomless carriers, they can infect many other people for years. Source of infection. The virus has been found in greatest concentrations in blood, semen, and cerebrospinal fluid. Lower concentrations, they have been detected in the tears, saliva, breast milk, urine, cervical and vaginal secretions. Human immunodeficiency virus, it has also been isolated in the brain tissue, lymph nodes, bone marrow cells, and skin. To date, only the blood and semen, they have been conclusively shown to transmit the virus. Now we will discuss the host factors. Age. Most cases they have occurred among sexually active persons aged 20 to 49 years. This group basically represents the most productive members of the society and those responsible for the childbearing and child rearing. Children under the age of 15 years, they make up less than 3% of the cases. Sex. In North America, Europe, and Australia, about 51% of the cases they occur in homosexual or bisexual men, while in Africa the picture is quite different. The sex ratio is equal. Certain sexual practices, they increase the risk of infection more than others. For example, multiple sexual partners and male homosexuality. High rate of HIV infection is found in prostitutes. There are certain groups which are known as high risk groups. These high risk groups include male homosexuals and bisexuals, heterosexual partners including prostitutes, intravenous drug abusers, transfusion recipients of blood and blood products, hemophilics, and clients of STD, that is sexually transmitted diseases. Mode of transmission. The causative virus is transmitted from person to person, most frequently through sexual activity. The modes of transmission are the sexual transmission, blood contact, and maternal fetal transmission, that is from mother to child transmission. Now we will discuss these transmissions in detail. First of all, sexual transmission. AIDS is first and foremost a sexually transmitted disease. Any vaginal, anal, or oral sex can spread the AIDS. Every single act of unprotected intercourse with a HIV infected person exposes the uninfected partner to the risk of infection. The size of the risk is affected by a number of factors which include presence of STD, the sex and age of the uninfected partner, the type of the sexual act, the stage of illness of the infected partner, and the virulence of the HIV strain involved. HIV infected people, they are more infectious to others in the very early stages of the disease before the antibody protection, that is during the window period. And when the infection is well advanced, because the levels of the virus in the blood at that time is higher than other times. Blood contact transmitted by contaminated blood transfusion of the whole blood cells, platelets, and factors 8 and 9 derived from the human plasma. The risk of contracting the HIV infection from transfusion of a unit of infected blood is estimated to be over 95%. As already discussed, the likelihood of HIV transmission is dependent on the dose of the virus injected. So, the risk of getting the infection through a contaminated needle or syringe is very less when compared with the transfusion. But still, among drug users who inject the heroines or cocaine or other drugs, this route of transmission is significant because the exposures is repeated often and sometimes several times a day. Maternal fetal transmission, that is mother to child transmission. In this route, HIV may pass from an infected mother to her fetus through the placenta or to her infant during delivery or by breastfeeding or by breastfeeding. In the absence of any interventions, rates of this form of transmission can vary from 20 to 25%. Transmission during the peripartum period accounts for one-third to two-thirds of overall numbers infected, depending on whether the breastfeeding transmission occurs or not, and this period has therefore become a focus of prevention efforts. Incubation period. The natural history of HIV infection is not fully known. Current data suggests that the incubation period is uncertain. It may be from few months to 10 years or even more than that. The virus can remain silent in the body for many years. It is estimated that 75% of those infected with HIV virus will, will develop the acquired immunodeficiency syndrome by the end of 10 years. Now we will discuss the clinical features of the HIV infection. The clinical features of HIV infection, they have been broadly classified into the four categories. Initial infection with the virus and development of antibodies. Second category, asymptomatic carrier state. Third, AIDS related complex. Fourth, AIDS, that is acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. Now we will discuss each of them in detail. Now we will discuss the first category, that is initial infection with the virus and development of antibodies. Except for a generally mild illness, that is fever, sore throat and rash, which about 70% of the people experience a few weeks after the initial infection with the virus, most HIV infected people, they have no symptoms for the first 5 years or so. They look healthy and well and feel well, although right from the start they can transmit the virus. And remember, once a person is infected, he remains infected with the virus for lifelong. HIV antibodies usually take between 2 to 12 weeks to appear in the bloodstream. This time period before which this time period before the antibodies are produced is known as the window period, during which, although the person is particularly infectious because of the high concentrations of the virus in the blood, but he will test negative on the standard antibody blood test. Though the body's immune system reacts to the invasion of the HIV virus by producing antibodies, these do not inactivate the virus in the usual way. Asymptomatic carrier state: in it, infected people, they have antibodies but have no signs of the disease except persistent generalized lymphadenopathy. It is not clear how long the asymptomatic carrier state lasts. AIDS-related complex: a person with AIDS-related complex has illnesses caused by damage to the immune system but without the opportunistic infections and cancers associated with AIDS. They may exhibit one or more of the following clinical signs. These clinical signs are as follows: unexplained diarrhea lasting longer than a month, fatigue, malaise, loss of more than 10% body weight, fever, night sweats, or other milder opportunistic infections such as oral thrush, generalized lymphadenopathy, or enlarged spleen. Patients from high-risk groups who have two or more of these manifestations, typically including the generalized lymphadenopathy, and who have a decreased number of T helper lymphocytes, are considered to have AIDS-related complex. Some patients with AIDS-related complex, they subsequently develop AIDS. AIDS. AIDS is the end stage of HIV infection. A number of opportunistic infections commonly occur at this stage, and/or cancers that occur in people with otherwise unexplained defects in immunity. Death is due to uncontrolled or untreatable infections. This slide is showing you the relationship of CD4 count to the development of opportunistic infections. In AIDS, there occur a number of opportunistic bacterial infections, viral infections, and also the cancers. These include tuberculosis, herpes simplex, herpes zoster infection, vaginal candidiasis, hairy leukoplakia, Kaposi sarcoma, pneumocystis, toxoplasmosis, cryptococcus, histoplasmosis, cytomegalovirus retinitis, and central nervous system lymphoma. Diagnosis of AIDS. WHO case definition for AIDS surveillance for adults. For the purposes of AIDS surveillance, an adult or adolescent that is greater than 2 years of age is considered to have AIDS if at least two of the following major signs they are present in combination with at least one of the minor signs which are listed in the next slide. And if these signs are not known to be due to a condition unrelated to HIV infection. Major signs include weight loss greater than 10% of body weight, chronic diarrhea lasting for more than 1 month, prolonged fever for more than 1 month, whether intermittent or constant. Minor signs include persistent cough for more than 1 month, generalized pruritic dermatitis, history of herpes zoster, oropharyngeal candidiasis, chronic progressive or disseminated herpes simplex infection, generalized lymphadenopathy, the presence of either generalized Kaposi sarcoma or cryptococcal meningitis is sufficient for the diagnosis of AIDS for surveillance purposes. For the diagnosis of AIDS in children, the case definition for AIDS is fulfilled if at least two major signs and two minor signs they are present. If there is no other known cause of immunosuppression is there. Major signs in children include weight loss or abnormally slow growth, chronic diarrhea for more than 1 month, and prolonged fever for more than 1 month. Minor signs include generalized lymph node enlargement, oropharyngeal candidiasis, recurrent common infections, for example, ear infection and pharyngitis, persistent cough, generalized rash. Confirmed HIV infection in the mother counts as a minor criterion. The definition for children is not very specific, particularly in the poor regions where childhood malnutrition and TB are common. For laboratory diagnosis, screening tests they are available. A person whose blood contains HIV antibodies is said to be HIV positive or seropositive, meaning that he or she is infected with HIV. To ensure accuracy, two different tests they are commonly applied. At first, a sensitive test, that is ELISA, is used to detect the HIV antibodies, while a second confirmatory test is Western blot, which is a highly specific test. It is based on detecting the specific antibody to viral core protein P24 and envelope glycoprotein GP41. However, this test is a difficult test to perform and requires trained and experienced laboratory workers to interpret the test. Virus isolation. A test for the virus itself would eliminate the painful uncertainty of AIDS infection. HIV can be recovered from the cultured lymphocytes. However, this type of testing is very expensive and requires extensive laboratory support. Control of AIDS. There are four basic approaches to the control of AIDS, which are prevention, which includes education and prevention of blood-borne HIV transmission, antiretroviral treatment, specific prophylaxis, and primary health care. Now, in the coming slides, we will discuss each of these points, each of these approaches in detail. Education. Aim of health education is to enable people to make life-saving choices. For example, avoiding indiscriminate sex using condoms. Avoid the use of shared razors and toothbrushes. Intravenous drug users should be informed that the sharing of needles and syringes involves special risk. Women who are suffering from AIDS or who are at high risk of infection should avoid becoming pregnant. Educational material and guidelines for the prevention of HIV infection should be made widely available. All the mass media channels should be involved in educating the people on AIDS, its nature, transmission, and prevention. This includes international travelers too. Prevention of blood-borne HIV infection. People in high-risk groups they should be urged to refrain from donating blood, body organs, sperm, or other tissues. All blood should be screened for HIV-1 and HIV-2 before the transfusion. Transmission of infection to hemophilics can be reduced by introducing the heat treatment of factors 8 and 9. Strict sterilization practices should be ensured in hospitals and clinics. Pre-sterilized disposable syringes and needles should be used as far as possible. One should avoid injections unless they are absolutely necessary. Antiretroviral treatment. No vaccine or cure for the treatment of HIV infection AIDS is there. However, the development of antiviral chemotherapy has proved to be very useful in prolonging the life of severely ill patients. The availability of agents in combination suppresses the HIV replication. It has a profound impact on the natural history of HIV infection. People who achieve excellent suppression of HIV generally have stabilization or improvement of their clinical course, which results from a partial immunological reconstitution and a subsequent decrease in complications of immunosuppression. This table is showing you the different antiretroviral medicines which are used for the treatment of HIV and AIDS infection. These medicines include nucleoside reverse transcriptase inhibitors, nucleotide reverse transcriptase inhibitors, non-nucleoside reverse transcriptase inhibitors, protease inhibitors, and integrase strand transfer inhibitors. Now we will discuss the specific prophylaxis. Until more effective antiviral therapy becomes available, the main aim of existing therapies will be to treat the manifestations of AIDS. Primary prophylaxis against pneumocystis carinii pneumonia should be offered to patients with CD4 count below 200 cells per microliter. The regimens available are trimethoprim sulfamethoxazole, aerosolized pentamidine, and dapsone. Mycobacterium avium complex occurs in at least one-third of the patients. Rifabutin has been shown in the randomized trial to decrease the incidence of disseminated Mycobacterium intracellulare in patients with CD4 count less than 200 cells per microliter. Prophylaxis against tuberculosis is 300 mg of isoniazid daily for 9 months to 1 year. Kaposi sarcoma might be treated in some stage with interferon, chemotherapy, or radiation. Cytomegalovirus retinitis can be controlled by ganciclovir, cryptococcal meningitis with fluconazole, esophageal candidiasis or recurrent vaginal candidiasis can be treated by fluconazole or ketoconazole. Herpes simplex infection and herpes zoster infection can be treated with acyclovir or foscarnet. Primary health care. Because of its wide-ranging health implications, AIDS touches all aspects of primary health care, including mother and child health, family planning, and education. So it is important that AIDS control programs they are not developed in isolation. Integration into the country's primary healthcare system is essential. This concludes our today's lecture. Thank you very much.